part of the Chopin Society presentation of the 7th competition is not only represent music, but also present aspects of music through the knowledge of both our guest artists and, of course, members of the jury. And Professor Raymond Holden, who is Emeritus Professor at the Royal Academy of Music, is a fantastic choice for us to have to introduce a very unusual theme, a very unusual topic. And the topic is reproducing pianos. The essence of a reproducing piano is that you hear the actual instrument, you don't hear a recording, and that's essential. Now, the question is who plays it and how it is played, and that's quite a complicated set of both mechanics, some of them purely mechanic, some of them even in the early 1920s, electric, so they were incredibly advanced and very expensive instruments, and in a way it is the nearest we're going to get, not recordings, of which there are plenty from the 1890s onwards, bad recordings, but they were recordings, but to actually hear the instrument itself playing. And here is the story, in fact, of piano rolls. And we're absolutely delighted to have Raymond here with us, which is an expert on the topic, okay, to tell us about it. I'm not an expert, but I have about 120 CDs of recordings of piano recordings. So I love to hear all this because I've heard the sound, now I'm going to hear the story.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Well, how lovely to see you all here. I think we need a bit of screen back again with me, if I may. Something on the projector. How are we? We're back, are we? Well, so why piano rolls? Always good in music to ask the question, why? Well, what I suggest is we try this to start with, yeah? So, here we go. There's the roll. Right. Now, one of the things we might agree on, that it's not the best piano in the world, which is fine. I mean, that's not the point really at all. Yeah? And of course, there it is there. If we go back to the beginning, of course, we actually have it played by the great objective composer Prokofiev with the great romantic Rachmaninoff. But the point really is this, is when I first heard that piece, that played that way, I was 10 years old. I was 10 years old at the house of one of Sydney's leading music teachers. There were several super music teachers in Britain, in Sydney, sorry, I live in Britain now, in Sydney, and they were just magnificent. They could teach that chair music, yeah? They were absolutely outstanding as communicators, yeah? And this particular chap, Dennis Condon, who died not long ago, had the third largest collection of piano rolls in the world. I'm not sure how you tell that, you know. It's a bit like the Billy Connolly joke of how many sardines there are in the world. Who counts them, you know? It's one of those things, you know? Who knows, you know? But he was supposedly the third largest. Now, as a 10-year-old hearing that, I was transfixed, you know? He had a house in not the best part of Sydney, but it was big. Yeah? And he called it Ampico Towers. Yeah? The American piano company will become clear later on. Yeah? Great producers of piano rolls. And in that house, he had 10 grand reproducing pianos. And he had the most stylish lighting. And as a 10-year-old, I was transfixed by hearing that. The lighting was dim and there was this piano making a sound. I had a pianola at home, a very good one, but you had to actually be involved with that. This, you didn't have to be involved with, yeah? And as a 10-year-old, that was magic. Then I heard Debussy playing Debussy. I heard Grieg playing Grieg. I heard Rachmaninoff playing Rachmaninoff. I heard Strauss playing Strauss. And even as a 10-year-old with a fascination for history, I thought there was really something there. Absolutely something there that should be looked at. And nobody was interested. He was interested and a handful of others around the world. And I thought there was really something we should know about, yeah? I don't want that back. So what about it? Why did they come about? Well, mechanical instruments can more or less be traced back. Some say to the 9th century, some say to the 14th century, but certainly attempts at mechanical pianos certainly go back into the early 19th century. But when we come to the turn of the 19th and 20th century, where this really takes off, it really blossoms, we also have as a competitor there the invention of recording by Thomas Edison. So many of you will know that Thomas Edison famously had his bit of tin foil in 1877, which actually he got indentations in, and he got the words, "Mary has a little lamb." The first words famously recorded. The first really great improvement to communication since the inventing of the printing press, arguably, certainly for music. The invention of sound recording. Many others were doing it around the same time. And he was a remarkable fellow, very self-centered, of course, as we all know. And he invented, as you can see up there, the graphophone. It wasn't called the gramophone, it was called the graphophone, in 1877. In 1887, a man called Emil Berliner, a German, invented the gramophone. And he also was very important in inventing the microphone, which we'll come to later, which also affected piano music as well. Now, Edison was a shrewd businessman. So he sent representatives around the world to actually start recording the biggest figures. And amongst them, of course, as you can see up there, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Sullivan in the 1880s and the 1890s. And my great teacher's teacher's teacher, Hans von Bülow, was recorded in New York playing some Chopin. He was also recorded conducting in 1890 the first ever complete concert, including the first ever complete recording of a symphony, Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, which is since lost. And the irony here is that Bülow was one of the great minds of the world, conductor of Brahms, conductor of Tchaikovsky, Tchaikovsky played the first Tchaikovsky concerto premiere, conducted Wagner for the first time, was the great teacher of Richard Strauss, When he died in Cairo in 1894, they took his body back to Germany, and as the smartest man in the world, apparently, as they thought, they chopped his head off. They took his brain out and examined it, but they sadly lost it as well. That was a bit of a downside to that. But they also lost all those famous recordings of that symphony that he recorded with Edison. And I used to say to my students at the Royal Academy of Music, if you step on something a bit squishy, it might be his brain, and if you're in Connecticut and you're in a barn and you hear something go crackle under your feet, it might well be those famous piano rolls. Be careful where you tread. It might be Hans von Bülow with this. And then with Brahms, who was also a close friend and sometimes occasional enemy of Hans von Bülow as well, Brahms was recorded. And he was recorded playing his Hungarian Dance #1 in 1888. And that is the first extant recording we have of a piano, to my knowledge. Somebody may come up with some somewhere else in the world, to my knowledge, yes? There was an early recording with the great Joseph Hoffmann when he was a 12-year-old, but apparently that is now lost. But these things have a habit of resurfacing at some point. And there is Tommy Edison there. You can see Edison with his invention. There's the graphophone there, which is that bit there. Hang on, that's the wrong one. I shall take that one. There's the graphophone there. And there's the wax cylinders. So they're wax, those little white things, that would then slip onto that. There would be a stylus that would go up and down. I'm really making this fairly straightforward at the moment, which with different indentations, which is called hills and dales, like in the mountains. A dale is a valley, a hill and a dale, and that would create the sound. And you would make that by turning that device there. Eventually, of course, it became electronic and the quality got better and better. Yeah? And the sound had to be recorded into that and came back out of that. And if you were a singer, you had to have your head held in like that. They had to hold your head in so that you could actually make the sound clearly enough. Sopranos are good, tenors are good, altos not so good, bass is not so good, yeah? The piano, yeah? And it was called the graphophone. And apparently it made every home happy, yeah? And they weren't cheap. They were, today's money, that would be about £3,800. But here is the first extant recording. Here we go. Tell me what he says. I'm open to anybody's suggestion here. Hang on, let's do this again. It doesn't want to do it. Let's do it this way. No, go back. Go back. Excuse me if I have a fight with my computer. That's it. That's a piano, by the way. I'll put you out of your misery. Okay, listen again. See what he says. He says it in English, strangely enough. I'm Dr. Brahms. I am Dr. Johannes Brahms. He says it in English. And he turns around and he plonks away on that. Now, anybody know what piano that is? What brand? How good are your ears? Well, I don't blame you, frankly. It's a Stryker, because you always played on a Stryker, which was actually an extension of a Stein, which came back, which Mozart favourite piano maker as well. He always played on a Stryker. He liked Strykers better than Steinways, yeah? But that's quite important, because although it's a bit crazy, it's like something from outer space, yeah? You're touching base with the 1880s. You're touching base with one of the greatest musicians of all time, which you can't do elsewhere. Well, other piano recordings soon followed, of course. And they got better and better, like everything. Things get better and better. Yeah? And there's a famous French pianist called Raoul Pugnot. He lived between 1852 and 1914. And he was amongst the first to document this stuff on disc. He wasn't alone, but he was amongst them. Yeah? And famously, he recorded music by Handel and Scarlatti. And you say to me in a loud voice, so what? So what? Yeah? Well, we're used to Handel and Scarlatti now, yeah? But at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, they didn't quite have the same public fame that we have today. They often were considered the province of the classroom, yeah? Opera houses didn't play Handel operas, for example, or Scarlatti's father's operas. There's two Scarlattis. The father wrote a lot of operas. The son, Domenico, wrote, as we know, a lot of sonatas, yeah? And this was quite unusual at the time. But they recorded using the acoustic process. So the horn I showed you, yeah, was called the acoustic process. Yeah? You recorded into a horn, you recorded back. No electricity involved at that point. Yeah? It was called acoustic. Yeah? And that meant that the instruments themselves sounded like banjos. And that's what they really hated, yeah? And there's Pugnot looking very grand there with his pince-nez on. And there's an image of a piano being recorded with the acoustic process, yeah? Now, I'm not sure how accurate this is because I wasn't around at the time. I'm old, but I'm not that old. But there's the horn. Remember that device I showed you earlier? Yeah? There it is there, the graphophone. There's the cylinder. This now would, of course, be electric, of course. There's no longer crank handle. The instrument would play into that, the sound would go onto the wax there. Yeah? Now, if I look at that, iconography, pictures, yeah, are really important if you want to know about music. Yeah? Well, apart from the fact that he's dressed very casually, I'm not interested in that. Yeah? But I am interested in that. I'm interested in the horn and how that operates, but I'm also interested in the piano itself. And if I look at it, it gives me some indication of what or where it might be made. Yeah? Now, I know he's French, And I assume at some point he must have been playing on Erards, because Erards use straight strings, yeah, and wood soundboards. I look at that, and what do you notice there? Anybody? I'll take an answer. Yeah. Well, that's cross-strung. Yeah, like Steinway used to do. Yeah, cross-strung. So it's probably got an iron frame, therefore. Yeah. So I pretty would go to the bookmakers, the betting shop, and suggest that's not a French instrument, probably on the whole. So it's probably not Pugno as well. And this is what his Scarlatti sounded like. Yeah. This. Here we go. Good fingers. Listen to what he does with the vibrato. Drops right back, yeah? Right. Now, if we were to play that today, yeah, we'd play that through virtually all in one tempo, what we would call the one affect, as they would say in Baroque music. The idea you've got the one affect, the one kind of emotion all the way through, yeah? But they wouldn't have thought about it in those ways, yeah? Maybe we're wrong, maybe they're right. I'll come back to that again. The word affect, A-F-F-E-C-T, yeah, with this, yeah? It's very important when it comes to Baroque music, yeah? And it's an interesting sound. But clearly, it's an unsatisfactory sound, yeah, because it sounds like they're broadcasting from Mars through a megaphone, yeah. It's not a great sound, yeah. So they were disappointed in this, yeah. But then, with the invention in 1895 of the player piano, there. Pianola by this guy here, Edwin Voti, for the Aeolian Company in America, pianist really saw that there's a partial improvement. Now, the Aeolian Company, Aeolus, of course, as we know, is the Greek god of air. Yeah? And that's quite appropriate when we think about pianolas and later reproducing pianos, because the sound is inextricably linked to air passing through the roll. Yeah? So it's quite an ironic, or if not apt, way of calling it. So 1895 was a big moment for this. Yeah? But then there was an even bigger moment when it came to the interpretation of this music, yeah? And that was in 1904 by Michael, in German, Michael, yeah? Michael, Welter and Cerner in Freiburg in Breisgau in 1904. Now, they invented the reproducing piano, which was electronic. Yeah? And that was very, very important. Freiburg in Breisgau, by the way, is the Black Forest. Yeah? It's a very nice city, famous university there as well. I'm there quite often on the way to Switzerland. Yeah? Now, the real thing was pianos and recordings of pianos sounded like pianos. That was important. It's sort of self-evident you'd want that if you're making a recording of something, don't you think, yeah, with this? And that was really, really important. So Herr Welter and his sons really started to put the cat amongst the pigeons with this, yeah? And there's the factory. It's now gone. It's big, yeah? It's big. Because pianos were big business. In the United Kingdom, in London, in England alone, there were 200, I should say, piano makers at the end of the 19th century into the 20th century. 200. There's one. It was on the news on the BBC the other day, the last remaining piano maker in England. Isn't that a shame? Isn't that a disgrace? Yeah? Germany had excess of 300. Hundreds of thousands of instruments were made every year, and that was really important. And not only did they make reproducing pianos, they made reproducing organs as well. And that was quite something, yeah? That was quite an important thing as well. And then you also had this. That thing there looks like an organ, does it not? Yeah, on the top left-hand side there, yeah? Try this for a sound. This is by Welter as well. No, play. Bit of a cool sound. Wacky. Wait for it though. Wait. That's in the instrument. Who would own one of these things? But you've got to see, the point is that we might think, well, hang on a second. You got all the percussion stuff going on, yeah? And it sounds a bit camp and a bit mad, does it not? It sounds a bit, a bit crazy. But was it? Was it? Well, Herr Mozart would say, absolutely not. Herr Mozart would say, how about this? How about this? He would say this. Yeah. You all know this piece, yes? Isn't that great? And my old mate Paul Badura used to have one of those as well. There's also a lovely film of him playing that. And inside we've got one of those instruments at the Academy. And inside there's a mini percussion section that you would operate with your knees. Yeah? And of course there's a historical, sociological, political reason why it's there. Yeah? Because that piece, like the Seraglio, the Enfuriasum Serai, set in a Turkish harem, yeah, was in 1782. And in 1782, the Emperor of Russia came to meet the Emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time, and they wanted to divide up the Turkish Empire. Yeah? And it was very fashionable, all things Turkish. And that would be what was called a Janissary band, because the Turks had percussion bands. And Berlioz wrote like that as well. Yeah? And so automatically you not actually have a piece of a musicological history, you have a performance practice, you have some social history going on. So the idea of mechanical instruments or mechanical parts within instruments, other than strings and hammers, yeah, has a huge tradition. That, yeah, with that kind of, no, I don't want you again. So let's divide them into two bits. Let's look at the player pianos, not piano players, but player pianos. Yeah, you had two types. You had more than two types, but let's put them into two for the minute. Yeah, you have pianolas in one camp, and a bit later on, as I said, you have for Herr Michael Welter and Sonne, the reproducing piano a bit later on. Yeah? Now the pianola, yes, well, as we know, was first. It was 1895, and they started really to build from that. Yeah? Now this was the bastion of the middle class. If you read books on the social history of the piano, my dear friend, the great Professor Cyril Ehrlich, his book for Oxford is great, yeah, really readable, yeah, and you'll see that the actual way that people portrayed themselves sociologically is whatever piano they had. The better the piano you had, the higher class you were, and you were constantly trying to move up the social ladder. So much so that you would actually then sometimes buy a sticker piano. You ever heard about a sticker piano? So it was a piano, yeah, that you got a sticker and put a better brand on top of it, yeah. And some companies would buy pianos from one maker, go to another maker and stick a sticker on it to make it sound better sociologically. And that was really quite an important thing, yeah. Bizarre, yeah. And pianolas, there was no radio. Radio didn't happen until 1922. Marconi, yeah, with this. They are the main source of domestic entertainment, of course. And they were, by the way, the first music ever heard in Antarctica with Robert Falcon Scott, whose house is just opposite the Albert Bridge in Chelsea there, yeah, in 1911. And there it is there. There's a pianola in the Antarctic, yeah. There's the pianola there. He's pedaling away there like a champion. There's the piano roll there. If you want to pop down for a visit, the hut's still there. Yeah? There's the party. And of course, as we know, Scott died on the way back, didn't quite make it back, and was a bit disappointed because Amundsen had gotten there first. Yeah? So I suppose that was the end of that. But the important thing is that piano music was the first music heard in Antarctica. Yeah? Now, a bit like all companies, and a bit like all companies that want to protect their business, the pianola was a trade name. It was a given name. They were really player pianos, yeah? But everybody started calling them pianolas. If we're in London, we have what we do the hoovering. Yes? If in Australia you do the hoovering, they're hoovers. That's a company. Huh? It's the same thing. It becomes a kind of nickname for it. Yeah? Hoovering. There's a pianola. And that was the Aeolian company, as I said, Aeolus, the air, god of air, god of wind in Greek mythology. Now, it now became the generic term, yeah, with that. And they're, like all good companies, they wanted to secure their share of the market. And as I said, if you consider the hundreds of thousands of instruments that are being produced across the world, and America was one of the really leading producers of this from about 1853 onwards, yeah, they were very careful about this. And Aeolian also had an umbrella with other companies. So they also own Weber, not Weber, Weber, Knabe, Chickering, amongst others. Yeah? So there was a very big business in this company with this. And they made it clear. They said the word pianola, this is their advertisement, is not a term applicable to piano players in general, but a specific name for the instrument manufactured and sold by the Aeolian Company, Aeolian Hall, 362 Fifth Avenue, and its recognised agents. In other words, don't pinch our name. Yeah? It's us. It's us. You have no right to it, yeah, with this. Yeah? Well, what about them? Well, they were mechanical instruments, which meant that you could be involved at least partially with the performance in some ways. Yeah? You could alter the sounds. You had pedals and you had levers, yeah? And there were instructions as to what you should do with these instruments. Yeah? And you could be involved in a certain kind of way. And depending on where and how fast you pedaled and how you operated the levers, the sound could be improved exponentially. Yeah? Pedaling fast, the thing got faster. Pedaling slow, the thing got slower. It was hardly advanced mechanics, okay, with this, yeah? But it worked, yeah? And they were very popular, yeah? And of course, composers started writing music for this because there was money in it, yeah? There was a huge amount of money in this stuff. And you had two kind of main types, yeah? There's others, but there are two main types. You'd either have the mechanism actually in an upright, or you'd have a robot which you'd push up. And by God, they're heavy, those robots. We had them in the academy. My God, they're impossible to move, yeah? And there's a good example. That's exactly like my instrument I grew up with in Sydney, yeah? A Steck. That's another company owned by the Aeolian. George Steck. He was Georg Steck. He went from Germany to America like Theodor Steinweg became Theodor Steinway, yeah? Now, if you look at it, it's a great piece of marketing, this. It's a Steck upright pianola piano. They could use the name because it belonged partially to the Aeolian Company. Yeah? Now, those pedals you'd fold up inside the instrument, and then you have your ordinary piano pedals there as well. There's the roll, there are the levers. This was quite good, even though it was made, it was an American brand. They had a branch in Britain. Same as Erard had a branch in Britain. Erard is a piano maker. He skedaddled, he left during the French Revolution and went to England, set up a factory in England and kept it there for much of the 19th century as well. So there were English-made Erards. This was a British-made Steck. And that was important because the British Empire wanted stuff from Britain. They didn't trust the Americans quite so much in those days. Yeah? They wanted British-made. British-made was good. These days, yeah, okay, you know, I buy German these days, yeah? And it was 275 guineas, which meant 275 pounds and 275 shillings. There's £1 and a shilling for a guinea, yeah? I can explain why, but it'll take forever to do it, all right? But assume that was about £17,000 today for that instrument, which is about the price now, I understand, of a Bechstein upright, a decent Bechstein upright, yeah? Now, along with that, they would send you that, yeah? And that would actually look at this and you say, isn't that great? Look at how complicated that is inside. Every time I get my new BMW sports car, I've had 7 of them. They show me, they lift the bonnet, I look at it, and I have this huge engine inside. I say, good. I kick the tyres, shut the bonnet, never do it again. But I'm really impressed that I've been able to open the bonnet for this, yeah? And they can show me proudly, yeah? But this is quite important because there, the pedals would operate that vacuum chest there, which would send air up to, I'm being very basic now, and out through the piano roll, and sound would be made, yeah, with this as well. And it was quite important with this to actually show how these things worked. They were very complicated instruments, by the way, yeah. And there is a push-up, a robot, yeah, and that would go up to a grand. And today, this is one being restored. There are the fingers that will be used as well, and we'll go back to that a bit later on. But what do they sound like? Well, there's a roll. Okay, so here behind me, there's the scroll itself, which would come in a box. At home in Sydney, we had about 300 or 400 of those. Yeah, of those. I'm sure there are millions floating around the world. Yeah, and then you'd unfurl them, you unroll them, clip that on there. And the longer the hole in the paper, the longer the note. The shorter the hole, the shorter the note. Not rocket science, but it worked. Yeah? And they were very advanced. Now this is a song called Manhattan from Garrick Gaieties by Rodgers and Hart, the famous musicals composers. Yeah? And not only was it for domestic use, but the pianolas were also used in a commercial setting. So they were the kind of karaoke of the day. Yeah? It would be cheaper to have a pianola in there than actually having a band of musicians. And so I want to start this and show you. Yeah? So here it goes. Let's try this for a second. I want to stop it when it gets to my point. Don't run it. Don't do that. No. Go back. I knew that would do that. Go back again. There. Right. So on there, yeah, you can see 2 numbers. Yeah? So 80, you could adjust the speed, 95. So if you were singing this, you'd play it at 80. If you were actually dancing to it, you'd play it at 95. Now, as it's the karaoke of the day, you didn't have these things everywhere. But on the piano roll itself, if you look on the right-hand side, they've got all the words. So you could sing along to it. I will spare you the misery of me singing it, okay? But you can see what I'm talking about. So here you go, just a few bars of this, If I May. And there go the words. In Manhattan, Bronx or Staten Island too, yeah? The zoo, I can't do this. So absolutely every word's there. And I have to say, I could do it as a child, yeah? Everybody could actually sing along with these piano rolls, yeah? So the piano was really a cool instrument to have at the time, yeah? With that. And of course, but if you're a bit more dignified, a bit more ladylike, like that young lady there, she's playing on a much grander instrument with a robot that's pushed up to it, which is like the image I showed at the beginning. Now, you could play them like that, okay? And if you play Rachmaninoff like that, it'll sound like this. Not the most inspired moment of history, yes? W.R. Poker, yeah? But if Rachmaninoff played it, which he did, he sounded like this. A bit more stylish, do you not think? The boy understood a polka. Now, just a minute. You see, if you were trained, however, to work a pianola, it sounded more like this. This is the same pianola, the same roll played properly. Now, it may not be Rachmaninoff. damn sight more stylish, though, do you not think? Yes? Yeah. Isn't that incredible? When one talks about musical metamorphoses, yes, this is quite an important one, yeah? Yeah. And the thing was that... Shush! Stop. Go back, yeah? It's counterpoint with Rachmaninoff. But if you read the literature of the age, that was made clear by a lot of leading pianists, believe it or not, a lot of leading pianists and a lot of leading instrument makers, that people should have pianola lessons, particularly the blokes, the guys, yeah? If you want to impress the chicks, the girls, go and have a pianola lesson, yeah? Because it's always the province of the young lady to play domestically the piano at home, yeah? But if you wanted to really show how getting in touch with your feminine side, go and have a pianola lesson. And that was how it was marketed. Fabulous, yeah? Absolutely fabulous. But it probably had one of its greatest triumphs in 1912. And I cannot work out why this is so. Because in 1912, 8 years had gone since the invention of the reproducing piano. Yeah? But there was the Queen's Hall. The Queen's Hall in London was at the top of Regent Street in Portland Place. You have Broadcasting House, anybody knows London, Broadcasting House, all sells Lehman Place, and there's a BBC building. At the back of that, there's 2 pillars that says Queen's Hall. And the Queen's Hall was there, seated something nearly 3,000 people, the most sumptuous concert hall in Britain and Europe at the time, but was bombed on the night of the 10th and 11th May 1941 during the height of the Blitz. Yeah? Gone. Yeah? But it was a great hall. And in it, in 1912, with the London Symphony Orchestra, the great Arthur Nikisch, the most fashionable and renowned virtuoso conductor, i.e. not a composer conductor, but just a conductor, yeah, and pianist. He was a pianist and violinist as well, played under Wagner for the opening of, for the laying of the foundation stone of Bayreuth as well. Quite an important guy. He actually did the Grieg piano concerto with that bloke there, with that pianola there, with a Weber piano, as you can see. Obviously Aeolian marketing themselves, yeah? And it says, it's great. That's their response. That's the graphic magazine on the left, one of the many magazines at the time, reporting on how astonishing this was. And then they're saying what the press said. So they were happy to say how good it was. So it says, an artistic triumph for the pianola, 1912, Queen's Hall. It said, played at the Queen's Hall with the London Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Herr Arthur Nikisch. The pianola recently vindicated once and for all the unique position it holds in the artistic world. Well, okay. On this occasion, the pianola was used to play the well-known Grieg piano concerto in A minor and the Liszt Hungarian Fantasy. The piano was also used to accompany the celebrated vocalist Elena Gerhardt, protege of Nikisch, in songs by Strauss and Wolf. Immense enthusiasm was aroused amongst the public and press by this concert, but none greater than that of Herr Arthur Nikisch himself, who wrote after the performance, save for the fact that the instrument supplies the performer with absolutely perfect technique, the pianola should never again be referred to as a mechanical instrument. Well, okay? So, if you want to find out, call at the Aeolian Hall and play the pianola, piano all right, to the catalogue, AA, the Orchestrella Company Limited, Aeolian Hall, New Bond Street, London. And if you want to visit the Aeolian Hall, you can't. But you can see its facade. It's opposite Sotheby's in New Bond Street. The facade of where it was is still there. Yeah? So I suspect that Arthur got a bit of a commission for this, as they all did in those days, a bit like Kiri Kanaro or, I don't know, tennis players being used for promotion of whatever they happen to do, for Rolexes or pieces of sporting equipment, yeah? That's not uncommon, right, with that. But try this. See what you think. Can you turn that up just a little bit? It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Now you might scream at me, where is the pianist for the pianola? Well, of course, it's not a pianola at all. As we know, it's a reproducing piano. And of course, it's the late Andrew Davis and the pianola there at the Proms. And of course, that was recorded in 1921 by my fellow countryman Percy Granger, who was a very close associate with Grieg, as we know. In fact, they had him planned to play the concerto together in 1906 at the Leeds Festival, but sadly Grieg, of course, as we also know, died with this. And it was actually a kind of spasm of interest in reproducing pianos and that concerto at one point. There's also on YouTube, if you look, there's another recording with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra and John Hopkins as conductor as well, playing it again. Fascinating stuff. It's sort of gone off the boil a bit now, But the reproducing piano set a whole new standards, And this was very important because it was electronic. It meant that the standard of reproduction was much, much better. Again, you could actually insert these into a piano, or you could have them as a robot. They exist in both circumstances. So as I was saying about when I first heard them as a 10-year-old, in Sydney at Dennis Condon's house in Newtown, they had both. And of course, it does make a difference, and also makes a difference about which instruments are being played, So they were remarkably expensive. I mean, the pianola wasn't cheap, okay, but these are expensive, by anybody's standard, and the rolls were too. And what made it even harder, what made it really hard, is the fact that one brand didn't fit all. So you had to actually have, you couldn't play a Velter necessarily in a duo art or vice versa, So you're kind of stuck with the same brand the whole time. It's a bit like the old, for those of us who are over the age of, God knows what, Betamax VHS with tapes in the old days. You had a Betamax, you had a VHS, and one superseded the other in the end, You couldn't use it in either. Now, the four main companies, and before you scream at me there were more, yes, I know there were more, but the four main companies, and the one who invented, of course, Velter Mignon in Germany in 1904, Hupfeld in Germany in 1907, in the States, Ampico, the American piano company, in the USA 1914, and Duo Art also in 1917. In fact, they merged later on. Now, marketing was all. And don't forget, this was super big business. Super big business, By anybody's standards today, I don't think we can even match it in many ways, with this. And people actually start talking rubbish about business in music, by the way. So when they talk about somebody selling X number of recordings, do you realise still that Herbert von Karajan still sold 275 million CDs? He's probably outstrips Beyonce, by the way, with this. And George Solti had 31 gramophones before, was it Beyonce got 33 in the end, Statistics are a marvellous thing. They get forgotten about, So these people were not immune to marketing. And so they understood they needed to have the reproducing piano, but they also needed to actually have still the pianola, So you're covering as much of the market as you can. And here is an ad for Velter Mignon. It says, das Reproduktionspiano Velter Mignon bietet die Möglichkeit, diese Originalspiel der ersten Pianisten der Welt in eigenen Heim zu hören. Well, loosely translated, it says, the reproducing piano of Velter Mignon offers you the possibility, Möglichkeit, of the original performances of the ersten leading pianists of the world in your own home to listen to, Ein Druck auf den Knopf, a push of the button, and you can hear Dalbert, Busoni, Paderewski, Reisenau at your pleasure. Michael Velter and Sons, Hoflieferanten, that's royal suppliers of these instruments, Freiburg and Baden. And then on the other side, Hupfeld is still knocking out pianolas, but grand ones. You can see they're rather grand ladies there, but it's definitely a pianola, not a reproducing piano. Same in America, Ampico does the same, and Duo Art. This is an ad for Duo Art, but through the English office. I think this is a wonderful ad, Obviously selling itself to the commercial market here in the city. It says, it's great, a fitting end to the joys of the day or forgetfulness of the cares. I'll read it from here. I'll do it with this. Sorry, go back. This one I'm after. The duo-art, pianola piano, Steinway, Weber or Steck, when the day's game is over, the day's share in the battle of business done. Then let the magic powers of music minister just what is most needful. Solace, grandeur, inspiration or joyousness. Round off the day in a finale fitting with its joys or cares. With the duo art, all the joys and powers of music are yours. You may sit and listen to Paderewski playing as if personally present, Paderewski again, not knowing a note of music, yet you yourself may play the masterpieces of music, classic, popular, dance, with perfect understanding and self-expression. The whole realm of music is at your command through the duo art. And when desired, the duo art is just a magnificent piano for ordinary hand playing. Okay? The priceless possession of a duo art is now made possible, and you can go to the Aeolian Company. And don't forget, for people like Andrew here, who's an economist, the piano was one of the first objects that was ever put on hire purchase. So you could actually hire it and pay it off. Yeah? And it was some of the biggest scandals of the 19th century were to do with hire purchasing of pianos. It was a real scandal, yeah, with that. And there is the robot. The fingers come up to the keys, as you'd expect, and of course the feet operate the pedals, as you'd expect. Now, because this improved on that sound we heard with Pugnio, yeah? And because it sounded more and more like a piano, and they could make these quite easily, pianists and composers flocked to those four big companies, and they seized the opportunity to help them market them. They jumped at the opportunity. They got paid a lot to do so, yeah? And there's Pachmann, who was convinced he was the greatest pianist of all time, most of the time, yeah? Now, there's a cat, Pachmann's cat. I'm sure it's like Schrodinger's cat, but I'm not quite sure you can have the same discussion there with that, whether it's dead or alive, okay? There's Pachmann's cat, and there's Pachmann's piano. Now, this is a recording session. Okay, it's a recording session. Tell me what you think might be wrong with this recording session. Here we go. It's silent because the microphone wasn't invented yet. Okay, there's Herr Pachmann, and there's the recording engineer stroke producer looking like the local undertaker. Okay, he's about to bury the boy. There he is, putting up the flügel. Yes, Pachmann's enjoying his moment of fame. The cat's absolutely loving it all. And there, bowing gracefully, the undertaker goes off, yes? And he pops out and he starts tinkling away on the old piano. Yeah? I'll skip a little bit now until we come to this bit here. So he's finished tinkling away after about 5 minutes, and all of a sudden, the producer, stroke undertaker, reappears with a magic article. Oh my God, this is marvellous. Look what I've done, yes? Can we now edit this? Of course we can, Monsieur Pachmann. Of course we can. Of course we can. So we pop outside and we go now to a completely different instrument, which is not a reproducing piano, by the way, and they start fictitiously editing this stuff. Yeah? Now, the punters love all this kind of stuff, yeah? And what's wrong with it? As a piece of marketing and as a piece of informative marketing. I'll take anything you want to throw at me. I'm Australian. I get used to having things thrown at me all the time. Now?
We can't hear anything?
Well, you can't. Well, that's true because the first ever sound film was 1927 and the jazz singer, yeah? Because no microphones. They came in 25, 26. True. You wouldn't hear anything either. And you're not far from the mark, by the way. There's no recording equipment. Have a look. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. He managed to make a recording out of thin air, yeah? Like modern gullibility, consumers at the time fell for this stuff hook, line and sinker. It's a bit like today. Every time there's a new iPhone on the market, they probably do nothing or more, or a new Samsung or whichever it happens to be. Everybody runs out to buy it as well. It's part of the sort of marketing strategies of these companies to put somebody famous with a particular object, and you might leap at the prospect of getting it. It's standard marketing, yeah? And it was big business. Well, let's go back a bit. Let's look at what this means in terms of music. Okay, I've talked about marketing. Well, one of the earliest born persons to be actually recorded on this stuff was a man called Karl Reinecker. Yeah? Now, Karl Reinecker was a great conductor, not great composer, great conductor, composer, and well-known pianist. Now, he was considered one of the greatest Mozartians of his age. He in the 19th century, Richard Strauss at the turn of the 20th century were considered the great Mozart conductors of their age. Now, there's a great man there, and you might notice he's playing on a Blüthner. Now, he was very active in Leipzig because Julius Blüthner, as we know, was born in Leipzig and was a Leipzig-based company which also operated in Berlin, which had the Blüthner Hall, the Blüthner Orchestra. And, of course, it started in 1853, the same year as Bechstein and Steinway's as well, a sort of watershed year for piano construction. Yeah? There he is there. Listen to this. Tell me what you think. Okay? I think you'll hate it, which is fine. I'm quite happy for that to be the case. Here we go. Mozart, obviously. Concerto. Play this for an entrance into the Royal Academy of Music. That's a reproducing piano. Yeah, it's all a reproducing piano. Yeah, on a Veltamignon. Yeah. Okay. Same year. Adelina Patti singing Mozart. See what you notice. One of the greatest singers of her age, commanding staggering fees. Same year. Listen to the piano underneath as well. Now, I suggest if you actually turned up either a singer or a pianist and did that at any of the major conservatoires around the world, they'd run you out of the room on a railway track, most of the time, yeah? Which is interesting, I've found, with this kind of thing. Because if you also listen to other singers of the age, people like Tetrazzini, who actually decorates all the time, particularly the Pages aria from In Ballo and Maschera, which you don't hear in the Mutti recording or others, it's a completely different way of singing. Yet these people were in the milieu of these great composers, They actually sang in the milieu, in the precincts of these great composers. Now, what you hear is a lot of tempo modification. Some people will say, and they're wrong, by the way, that it's actually random. It's not. Get a metronome out and you'll see it isn't. Do your homework with this. Get one out and it isn't. And it would be considered an unacceptable romantic way of playing or singing. Yet Reinecker was born in the classical period. He was actually trained in the classical period and the immediate post-classical period, with this. And also the same could be argued for Patti. Now, if you take this slightly further and you actually go to Richard Wagner, when he famously came to London in 1855, he slowed down the second subjects of symphonies, and he conducted those slower for tempo modification. People were outraged. They said it's romantic, romantic. He said, well, hang on a second, sport. Hang on a second. This is what Weber did. Weber did this. I'm doing what Weber did. Weber dropped dead well in the classical period. In 1826, he dropped dead in a house of one of the Academy staff, actually, after playing it and conducting at the Academy. We knocked him off, with this, And, of course, he was very much in the case. And he said, this is precisely the tempo modification Weber used to do. Now, Wagner had all his training. He was born in 1813, and by the time of the end of the classical period, schoolboy mathematics of 1828, he was 15. His entire training as a musician was in that period. He was then working professionally 5 years later, with this. So maybe they're doing the right thing, and maybe we're not. Maybe it's the other way around. But certainly to dismiss it out of hand, maestro. Oh, it was critics. A man called Davidson.
They expected it to be very straight.
Yes, because they'd heard Mendelssohn, and because you go, this is a whole discussion about the Mendelssohn-Wagner school of conducting, yeah? Is that Wagner says, well, Mendelssohn just churns it out the whole time. If you have some of my venerable colleagues, I say, well, that's not true either. But the problem with this is there's so little written about Mendelssohn that it's really hard to actually come to any documented evidence with this. But we do know the case of Wagner, because they pounded him to death with rocks in 1855 in London because of this, yeah? But he stuck to his guns. And nearly every major conductor and pianist after that and string player would make those modifications, yeah? Then they've changed them back again. Just in the same way, if you're a string player, yes, and somebody will say they didn't play with vibrato. And I say, well, hang on a second. If you go back to somebody like Joachim, somebody like, I'm paraphrasing now, they don't need to send me letters about this, I know I'm paraphrasing, yeah, is that some people say, well, of the Romantic period, they'll say, well, I counsel against the use of excessive vibrato, yeah? What he's saying is, I don't like vibrato, they do it, yeah? Now, if you're actually doing what they do in terms of period performance, you should do what they do, not what he says I don't like they're doing. Yeah? It's the complete reverse. And I remember having this discussion with Styra Avens. She was the cellist in Stokowski's orchestra who edited all the Brahms's letters. And she said to me, you're the first person to say this. I said, but it's strikingly obvious. Read what the guy says, not what you want him to say. Yeah? And that's a problem when it comes to this. Yeah? And of course, these pianos can be considered educational as well. And during the acoustic period where we had no microphone, so sound was limited, they were used at the Academy as a tool. So in 1922, the centenary of the Academy, they made this film. Yeah, I won't play more than a second of it. We're going to run out of time otherwise. This is a duo art. And to their amazement, the students were sitting around. There's the whoever's teaching them at the time, all dressed rather nicely, you know, in those days with that. They put in and this was the height of technological advance, even by 1922 in many ways, yeah? This is 1922, and they're showing them what you can do, yeah? And this is at the Royal Academy. That piano has since been sold. We did have it up until some years ago, yeah? And explaining that. This is part of a bigger film celebrating what actually happened in the building. So this is something as a marketing tool as well, okay? So we're going to be assured that this is of cutting edge importance at the time. He of course puts it in, he shows them how it goes in, there it goes, in there. A bit of an ad for duo art down the street in Bond Street, it has to be said. It starts up and off she goes, and whichever prelude that happens to be, yeah? And of course, that was very important because people like Henry Wood, when they made recordings, he taught singing his entire life, Henry Wood. He wrote a 4-volume treatise on singing, the great Henry Wood conductor who founded the Proms. Yeah? 4 volumes on singing teaching. Yeah? He would say, listen to recordings of singers. If you want to learn how to actually sing well and not he says the breathy sound of the English, yeah, with this, listen to the great overseas artists. Rossini, in the mid-1850s, said in a little 3-point manifesto about bel canto, yeah? He said, if you want to learn how to sing beautifully as a bel canto singer, listen to the masters of the past, yeah? With as well. And that's quite an important thing, yeah? So what about composers on rolls? Well, composers left at this as well. You can break them into 2 bits. Yeah? You can break them into those who never made gramophone recordings, like Mahler, Humperdinck and Grieg. They made rolls. Yeah? Then you have the ones who did make recordings, both on shellac, i.e. 78s, and magnetic tape, like Strauss, during the war. And they were Busoni, D'Albert, Saint-Saëns, Debussy, and Richard Strauss, of course. Yeah? Now, there's Dr. Strauss in the pit, yeah, conducting there as well. And he said, of the Walter Mignon process, he said in 1906, Mignon is an extraordinary invention of all such mechanisms, the only one which can lay claim to artistic significance. To the inventors, I extend my sincere admiration. Well, he didn't extend his pocketbook because he didn't buy one. Yeah? He didn't have one. And in his house in Garmisch, which I've worked in many, many times because I've written a lot about Strauss, he was given an E-bark. Yeah? And apparently at the house that he built in Vienna, the Dutch embassy said that's his Beckstein. I don't think it is, because they brought his old piano out at the end of the war and brought it to the room in which he died in Garmisch. So I'm a bit sceptical of that. It might be true, I might not know, yeah, with this. So On-roll. He did quite a number of roles. He actually created some piano rolls for singers to sing along to, as well, because his wife was a singer, a famous singer. He also recorded an extract from Holden Laban called The Love Scene. It's the passage in G-flat major. For Strauss, keys were important. Keys are important to all composers. They represent certain things. E-flat major, heroic in German culture. Magic Flute Overture, heroic, a symphony, Holden Laban, opening of the Ring Cycle, etc. E-flat major. For Strauss, G-flat major, enharmonically F-sharp major, was always to do with love. He then recorded Salome, the dance from Salome. Actually, he recorded it before the opera was released. And this opera was the most shocking and controversial of the time. When it was first performed in London, the Lord Chancellor, the man who was in charge of censorship, went to Sir Thomas Beecham and said, "You cannot put it on like it is. You cannot do that. You have to remove all religiosity. No head on a platter. Nothing." Beecham said, "Absolutely, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Lord Chancellor." Then went and did it, because he knew the Lord Chancellor wouldn't turn up because he's a complete Philistine, and got away with it like that. And the first Salome, Frau Wittig said to Herr Strauss, "Herr Strauss, I cannot sing this. I'm a good girl. I'm a good girl." She was quite a big girl, has to be said, with this as well. But it was shocking and controversial. And the king, Edward VII, paid Rubinstein and Olive Fremstedt, one of the great singers, to go to St. James's Palace and sing the final scene for them, because he couldn't go to the opera to hear it. It was too shocking. He blew smoke in the face, by the way, the whole time. Not Rubinstein, the king, with this. Now, the role met the demand of actually, there was trains going backwards and forwards between Berlin and Dresden, absolutely packed with punters the whole time, with this. Now, the Tanz was also recorded by Strauss twice on disc. So we have 2 recordings of him on disc, one commercial, one live, Now, the difference between the roll and the disc is it feels more like it's in one in a bar, like a waltz, And of course, his pulse is 48 to 50 to the bar with this as well. And the idea of the controversy of how you should beat a waltz still rages in Vienna today, with this, Now, for Strauss, the waltz was very important. For every work from burlesque onwards, he virtually dots it through. Even in Zarathustra, the dance of the Superman is a waltz. The Electra at the end of the opera, she dies to a waltz. So it's quite an important aspect of his aesthetic. There he is there, Salome. And here is a recording made privately backstage in 1942, while the bombs are dropping on Vienna, of Strauss conducting Salome at the opera, and here's part of the waltz, conducted with the Vienna State Opera Orchestra, stroke Vienna Philharmonic. It's definitely in 3. Had the best players in that night. It's a little machine at the back of the theatre, private. You get the idea, You get the idea, But a lot of still portamento going on there as well, But
the dance of the 7th Veils.
So yes.
That's his dance.
Yeah. And it's actually from the full performance as well. There's also most of the rest of the opera, but they had to cut lots of it at the time. I'll give you a copy of it at some point. It's on my computer. Try this now with Strauss, with playing the role for marketing. He played concertos when he was young, but he didn't like playing the piano much. That's a completely different feel to the sound, That sort of gives us a clue of certain things, which is fine. But then here is Strauss, just before he died. A couple of weeks later, he died after this, And the last thing he ever performed live was this at a rehearsal.
Wir fangen an, Ziffer 253.
Ja, Herr Strauss. He entered the Rosenkavalier Munich State Opera. He then drove up the road and died a few weeks later. He's 85. Look at that there. It's quite clear. That's his son over his shoulder. He's as blind as a bat by this stage, by the way. He had to be told by Schulte where the horns and everybody were. He used to conduct this opera house all the time as a boy. His father was in the orchestra 50 years. He's sort of peering away there, trying to find his place in the score. He's still cueing, yeah? He still hasn't given up. He still follows the singer. Watch on the long note. The baronox. He moves through the long note to help him. Now it moves on. A little quicker on the long note. So the
3 months.
So the baritone, the bass, doesn't actually run out of puff there, yeah? But it answers a lot of questions. That film as well, about the waltz. He can combine all these things as a musician to get an answer. Because there's a discussion. Lenny Bernstein used to say, when they went to conduct that in Vienna, he asked the players about the waltz. Is it a longer second beat? Is it a longer third beat in the waltz to be characteristic? He got about as many answers for the second beat as he did for the third beat. In the end, he was actually more confused before he asked the question, yeah? But Strauss always holds the third beat up. His great acolyte, a man called Clemens Krauss, who's buried not far from him, always the second beat, yeah, as well. So it answers the question as to how you should do this. And by the way, for tempo, Schulte said, what's the speed of Rosenkavalier? And he went up to see Strauss at his house, up the road from that, yeah? And Strauss said, read the words. Say the words with the music. That's the speed of the opera, yeah? And it's absolutely true. It doesn't work otherwise, yeah? Now, Mahler. What about the great Gustav Mahler? Yeah? Well, there he is. Yeah? He made no recordings at all. We have no pictures of him conducting. We have cartoons. That's it, yeah? He made only 4 reproducing roles. And of those, he said, he was filled with wonder and admiration and agree entirely with those who've already spoken on the subject. Well, damned with faint praise. He could have said not much less, really, do you think, yeah? And again, he didn't own one, yeah, of this. But the piano rolls are the only sound documents we have. That's the only link to Mahler we have. He had 4. The Fifth Symphony's first movement, Fourth Symphony's last movement, the song Ging heute Morgen übers Feld. I went this morning over the field. Ich ging mit Lust durch ein grünen Wald. I went through it with happiness through a green forest, yeah? And those 2 are designed for singers to sing along with. Okay, that's the whole point. You're in your boudoir with your reproducing piano, you sing along with Herr Mahler. Yeah? Now, the Fifth Symphony, again, as I said, when I first heard these things when I was the age of 10, it was a revelation. I was about 18 when I heard this. There was a chap called William Reed, who was a conductor from Britain, went to the Australian Opera. He was on this ABC, and he played this piano roll. I thought, this is quite remarkable, even more remarkable still, because there's something really to this, because there are no recordings of this man. I was interested in those recordings then, yeah? Now, in the roll, it tells us a lot. As a former conductor, I don't perform anymore because of my health problems, but when I'm teaching conductors, they all ask for this, yeah? Because Mahler does some things that are quite clear, yeah? He has fixed tempos. He actually picks tempos that he actually builds it all around, yeah? He actually incorporates the voice, so he doesn't play the voice part. If he didn't practice the piano, okay? The easiest thing would have played the voice part and, forget the rest, frankly. But he doesn't do that, yeah? And it's always obviously designed, again, to sing along with as well, yeah? But it's more important than that. Look at that. I'm not going to dazzle you with numbers, all right? There are no metronome marks in the score. None. Nix, niente, yeah? Right? For a conductor, that's a nightmare. Because Mahler was a complete freak when it came to actually writing stuff in scores and telling exactly what he wanted, except here. But look, yeah? It doesn't take, a mathematician to work out there are 3 numbers, yeah? It starts at 92, goes to 100, goes to 80. They're the 3 architectural points, melodic points in this piece, yeah? And it comes back again and again. So after 92, it's 92, 100, 80, 100, 92, 80, 100, 92, 80, 100, 92, 80. It's what I would expect of a German conductor. And they all do it. And when I say they all do it, at the age of 70, I've listened to enough of these things with metronome marks to know they all do it. Yeah? And why do they do it? They want to actually allow it to happen. Sehr behaglich means very comfortable. Fließend means flowing. Plötzlich zurückhalten means suddenly held back. Okay, suddenly slowed down. Yeah. Now, did he do this? All right. And how else do I know apart from this is important? Yeah? Well, there was a conductor called Wilhelm Mengelberg who conducted the Concertgebouw from 1895 to 1945. He is dumped because he used to associate with the Nazis. Yeah? That's always a debatable point anyway, but he was there for 50 years. But he was the greatest Mahler champion of the age. Mahler's music wasn't played. In Amsterdam it was. Yeah? In Amsterdam it was, elsewhere less so. Yeah? And he actually had Mahler come in 1904. In 1904, he had Mahler, and Mahler conducted the symphony twice on one day in public. He had it on same, and the great Hans von Bülow did the same for Beethoven 9 many years earlier. He even locked the doors on the audience so they couldn't get out. Yeah, I don't think actually, Mengelberg went quite that far. Yeah, with this, and he then noted everything down in his score. There's the last movement there of his score. He sat down and wrote down what Mahler did. Okay, remember 92, 180. Yes. Well, lo and behold, what do you see? 92, 80. There she is there. This is the last movement, yeah? There it is there. He acts 92, 80 again. Writing in 80 there. Over here, a few pages later, at the Fließend, which is 100 on the piano roll, 104, which is barely a smidgen up, yeah, on that. You know, I can forgive Mahler for being a smidgen faster for that as well, yeah, with this, yeah? And at the top, he writes, Leise, leise, fromme Weise. Anybody? Well, it's actually Agatha's aria from Freischütz, the very light soprano aria from Freischütz, yeah? Leise, leise, he wants it to sound like that, yeah? With this, yeah? And then he writes, Das ganz himmlisches lustig, completely happiness in heaven, yeah? He then writes, Ein Kind erzählt, a child tells, a child recalls. Ein Kind, a child, erzählt, recalls, yeah? He then writes it again, down here, Ein Kind erzählt. So this is important, yeah? Important, yeah? And then he writes, freundlich und sehr behaglich. Friendly, yeah? So you're getting the whole feel of all of this, yeah? Now, the interesting thing about this is that in the recording I'm going to play you in a second, yeah? You're going to hear the piano roll, a few bars, yeah? And then the recording with Mengelberg. You'll hear they're very similar in tempo, not exactly the same, but similar. But Mengelberg used a light soprano, like a child. Yeah, like a child, Joe Vincent. Yeah, it wasn't the first recording of this symphony. That was recorded by a Japanese conductor, actually, strangely enough, in 1930, I think it was. Yeah, and then when Leonard Bernstein came to record this later on and perform it in public, he saw this score and actually used a boy's soprano. Yeah, there. That's when people say about he's using the boy's soprano. There it is. Yeah. So stop throwing rocks at Leonard Bernstein the whole time because he's good. Yeah. With this, and he was talented. Try this piano roll. Here we go. 92. If you get your metronome out, you'll find right. He really didn't practice the piano for this, by the way, guys. So a lot of the vocal part's just not there. And then you then realise he's actually done this as a music -1. Yeah? Oh, missed. Oh, missed again. Now. 100. Then, when he comes to when they're talking about St. Peter, the little chorale, of course it has to be slower. And it's always 80. Always 80. And those three speeds, again and again and again and again, and on purpose, yeah? And again, if just Mengelberg, just the opening, you can hear the same here with Mengelberg. There he goes. In fact, he sits back a little bit. And this is historic because he did actually work with the man, you know, from that score. But he moves a little bit more because he's got more flexibility because Mahler's fingers weren't what they should have been at that stage, yeah? And Joe Vincent, the light soprano. I won't go on about that, but you get the idea, yeah? The important point about that is, because a lot of this material occurs in the first movement, yeah, as well, it then tells us about what to do retrospectively, yeah? And there's a very famous review of Nikisho I talked about earlier, about German conductors understanding having the end in sight. I remember talking to Bernstein about this. He said to us, when you conduct, you always have to add the end in sight. And there's and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, we all know the piece, yeah? Ba 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 ba, bam bam bam, yeah? And there's a review for Nikisho's first ever conducting in London, because he was the first person to record it with a major orchestra. There's an early recording of that in 1913. It said he began like as if he had the end in sight. That was the review. No recordings in 1895 when he did that, yeah? Is right. And the idea of how you lock these symphonies together is very much part of how Germans understood this, yeah? So, finally, what about pianists? So, shut up, that's a good one. Shut up. That's it. What about these two geezers? Okay, you actually have Busoni and you have Friedman. Friedman personally is a personal interest because he washed up in Sydney just as war broke out, and he lived in Australia towards the end, and he actually taught my old friend, the great conductor, Sir Charles Macaris. Macaris used to say to me, well, Ignaz was determined I was going to be a pianist, and I was determined I wasn't going to be, you know, with this. And of course he taught many people in Australia. Now, Busoni is interesting here, yeah? Because he not only recorded obviously things like the Bach Chaconne that he arranged on there, but also all the Chopin preludes, for example. And there's a huge array of other recordings, not only on roll with Friedman, but elsewhere, yeah? Now, what about this? Well, both of them record Busoni's version of Campanella, yeah, with this. And apparently, according to Sir Henry Wood, you have to be very careful with Sir Henry Wood's memoirs. You have to be careful of memoirs in general, okay? They're a bit fanciful, yeah? So Sir Henry Wood says that as a 16-year-old, his father sent him to Boston to study conducting with great conductors. He never went further than 100 yards towards Oxford Circus in the centre of London. He didn't at all. It's a lie, yeah? It's full of lies most of the time. But some things you get a sniff that are okay about, yeah? And I suspect this is quite true. That Busoni said, everything we do is a transcription. Yeah? And working with music students, you should be considering what that really means, the breadth of what that meant. Yeah? Now, what it seems to me is happening here is an extension of that aesthetic. In other words, what he does is a transcription. Yeah? See what comes of that, shall we? So here, what about tempo? Well, frankly, there's not much between them. Yep, Friedman is a notch up on the metronome, but in keeping with the piece itself, you need to have terraced tempi. Yeah? It just doesn't work otherwise. And actually, the terracing is pretty similar if you actually stick a metronome to that as well. But what is the difference? Well, there is a difference when it comes to textual fidelity. In other words, what's on the score? Do you do what's on the score? And you spend your life in every major conservatoire having that discussion. Do you simply realise a piece of music, or do you interpret a piece of music? And you can actually have different definitions of what they are, okay? So, Busoni, unlike Friedman, actually makes a cut, a reasonable cut to the music. He just chops it out. Yeah? Well, I'm not against that. Tchaikovsky March Slav. I did that many times with London orchestras. I do the cuts that Sir John Barbaroli does. There's a whole lot of material there that you can get rid of quite easily. It tightens it up as a great piece. And listen to the Barbaroli recording. It's magnificent. Yeah? It makes it into a really good piece. It is a good piece there, hiding there somewhere. Yeah? It's a great piece. Yeah? He doesn't play any of his grace notes or decorations. He writes them in. It's not in the other score. He writes them in. He doesn't play them. Friedman does, yeah? He writes in a Luftpause. Yeah? It's not there either. But Busoni does do this. Yeah? Busoni is actually more faithful to the text, although it's still a bit liberal. So here's Busoni. Yeah? Still a good performance, but keep that in your ears. Try this now with Friedman. This is what actually Busoni wrote. For my money, actually my money's with the Friedman, as it happens, I think. But it's fascinating to compare the two. And it's essential because for young musicians, wherever you are, to sit down and do comparative listening is important. And I was explaining to Maestro Donoghue here the other day that it's not the idea that I want them to sit down and copy them, yeah? But I want them to inform what they do. If there is a situation where you find yourself as a conductor, as a violinist, as a pianist, with a sound you're trying to create, with somehow, if you actually look through this material, there may be a solution, a technical solution as to how to do this, yeah? And of course, then there's the aesthetic arguments that you should be all talking about, yeah? Because they did. They did, yeah? I know they did, yeah, with this. So, in the case of Busoni, for example, if I was talking about this with graduates or undergraduates, I would say, therefore, he does follow his dictum. Everything we do is a transcription, yeah? He's in fact transcribing his own transcription, yeah? So it's a transcribed transcription. Of course, the transcription, there's your list, there's his, and there's not, he's changed it again. Yeah? And of course, you then look to Friedman, who has a kind of foot in both centuries, and is much more literalist like we are today. So that goes into something like text, which all young musicians are desperately, they run off to get to the most recent text, the original text, yeah? Be very careful. Again, I go back to my old friend, Sir Charles Mackerras, who is very historically aware, sometimes painfully so, yeah? But, when he was a younger man, he bought huge numbers of old East German reprints of Breitkopf and Hettel. Yeah? He would then take them and mark them up according to the most advanced, most musicological changes. Yeah? He would actually make the changes in those scores. In other words, you don't need to spend all your hard-earned money on the most recent text edition, because most of them are probably not text at all. So there's a very famous edition of piano scores, Beethoven, Mozart, etc., from the German-speaking countries, that happens to put fingering in. So immediately you put a third finger in, you actually have the butterfly effect, because whatever happens around it will be actually affected. That's not an text. That's an addition. By anybody's stretch of the imagination, that's an addition. So therefore, ipso facto ergo, that's a con. Yeah? Because you see the word text and you salivate like Pavlov's dogs and you go and buy it. Yeah? Don't do that. Be discriminating. That's really important, yeah, with this. So, our conclusion and conclusions, yeah? Well, what we can say that from when the microphone became absolutely usual from 1926. The first recording using a microphone was Danse Macabre, by the way, with Leopold Stokowski and the Philadelphia Orchestra in 1925. Yeah? But from 1926, it starts to become absolutely the case. It's all then. They re-recorded everything again. Yeah? So reproducing pianos fell from favour because you could hear pianos now for the first time sounding like pianos on a disc. It was cheaper. That's the simple answer. It was cheaper, yeah? And that was the point. And then when the Wall Street crashed, when the stock markets all plummeted in 1929, even the most well-off collector of these found them too expensive. Yeah, they were virtually disused overnight. They were thrown into the bin virtually overnight. Yeah, and that was really quite sad. Yeah, with that. Now, and as I said, when I first heard this, I was 10, and that was so maybe 1964. Yeah, and nobody was really particularly that interested. In honesty, they weren't really, and that's a bit of a shame, but that's what happens in life and happens historically. However, now that's not the case, and they're not necessarily the answer to all things, but they are an answer. They are an indication, yeah? And that's what you should be doing with this sort of stuff. They indicate lots of different things. They indicate social, cultural, financial, and production histories of the piano. The piano doesn't sit in solitary isolation, splendid isolation. It's buffeted by all of those things, yeah? And you need to know where you are. If you're a musician, you are at the end of a historical continuum. You need to know what got you, why you are there, and what got you to that point, yeah? To work effectively as a musician, yeah? With this kind of stuff, yeah? And they also present keyboard works in different ways, yeah? They also, as we just saw, chart interpretative trends of the 19th and 20th century. And I would argue perhaps even to the 18th century with this as well. Yeah? And that's important in your armour of knowledge to hear this. You may not need to use it. You may not want to use it, but you must know where it is. And if you are teaching anybody ever in your life, and somebody comes and asks you the question, you probably won't know the answer. That's okay. But what you should be trying to do is be able to pass them to somebody who might know the answer, or to somebody you know who might be able to pass them on to somebody else who might know the answer. That's important too, yeah? And they also contain readings of material that cannot be found elsewhere. And my most famous example and favourite example of that are the Goldberg variations with Rudolf Serkin. One of my all-time gods as a musician, Rudolf Serkin. As my old boss, the drum teacher, used to call him the Prince of Pianists, yeah, with this. There's the Goldberg variations on piano rolls. They don't exist elsewhere, yeah? And it's worthwhile hearing them. There's not much Bach with him, but it's worthwhile hearing. And more important, and I will finish with this, they are vital pedagogic and interpretive tools. Those words sum it up completely. Thank you for listening. Great.
Gosh, I can sort of say that this presentation was like being presented with a very rich chocolate cake. You could either have great big mouthfuls out of that in the same way that our professor here was offering it, or you can take a little spoon and eat the whole cake a little bit at a time. Okay. If we have any questions, please.
I'd like to ask, actually.
Yeah, go for it.
Probably everybody already knows the answer, but I can't work it out. Those two, the two ones with the polka.
Yes. Yeah.
Where one of them was very straight and dead.
Yeah.
Dynamically with no
yeah.
light and shade at all. And the other did.
Yeah.
How do they achieve the variation?
By a very cunning use of pedals and by a very cunning use of the levers at the front, yeah? And that was the whole point about the idea that people were being actually educated into the use of these instruments. I suppose, like most mechanical devices, you know, if, again, I go back to my car, I have a BMW sports car, I have paddles on the steering wheel, I have 3 gearboxes on this thing. If you know how to use it, you can stick it onto Brands Hatch's race course, and it's got 400 brake horsepower. Most people don't use that. Most people just simply put it into gear and off they go down to the shops or whatever. Yeah, it's looking at what's the potential of there. In working on one of these things here, I use probably what 1/50th of the potential, 1/1000th of the potential of what's actually in the computer. Yeah, and that's my era really with this as well. It's come, and that's the whole point when people like Alfred Dolge. That's a very good book on the pianos. He's written about 1920, and he looks at piano manufacturers and how how they develop. And he himself has built a little town in uptown New York called Dolgeville, because it's where they made all the piano parts. Because at one point, making piano manufacturing into an industry, so as you then eventually, originally people would make all the individual parts and put them into a piano. But then they started making the actions, the keyboards, etc., and putting them together in mass production, just in the same way we build a BMW sports car or a Jaguar or a Ford or a Toyota or where it happened to be. And it's coming to terms with the mechanics of this is very important. And I think that's quite hard, actually, because we're all in danger of taking the easy option most of the time with this. And it's the same thing with the. It's the same thing about the. I suppose the Urtext, yeah. The easy thing is you go and get it off the shelves, yeah. And my friend Jonathan Delmo, we were talking about before, when I talk to him, he's a close neighbour of mine. I've known him for many years, and I'm in huge awe of him in many, intellectually he's fantastic, yeah. But as he says, this is his vision. He's making decisions of what he's putting in that score because he's got a whole series of sources. He's putting it together, yeah. And of course, with each score, he releases a book of notes. Yeah, they're literally a book of notes. Now, he doesn't expect anybody, as he said to me the other day, he doesn't expect people to read them from cover to cover. But when you're getting into it, you should perhaps look at a particular page there, for example. Yeah, and sometimes it makes no difference to the actual sound. So in Dvorak, yeah? We're talking to Jonathan. He said, I knew I was right. I can't remember. It was a demi-semi-hemi, however hemis, to make it as short as possible on da-da-da, yeah? He said, I knew I was right. He found this. And the new edition contains this, yeah? But if you do it with an orchestra and you go, ba-da-dum, they're going to play it on the downbeat anyway. They're going to play it ba-da-dum because that's how you do that, yeah? And you have to ask questions, like, in the case of that as a musician, you're talking about if you double dot, da-dum, 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 and say to them, why did they double dot? And should we continue to double dot? Just because they do it doesn't mean you should do it, yes? And you say, well, hang on a second. In the 19th, 18th, particularly in London, nobody had any rehearsal. So to be able to go da-da, 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 it's actually easier on the beat than going da-da, 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 because you actually have to rehearse the longer note, yeah? And you didn't have that. So for facility, that's easier, yeah? But in a modern context, it might be absolutely right not to do that, yeah? But provided you can argue your case musically and aesthetically, that's okay.
With permission of yourself and the audience, a very short interjection, because there is something that the Chopin Society has done with performing pianos, but in a very strange way. You may know the Espirito, which is the modern version of Steinway, yes, whereby you sit down, you play, and the piano records your playing. Not records the sound, records the physical parts, then you step away, and then the piano reproduces your playing. Okay? Well, now, there is another version, rare, and has now defunct because the company that actually produced the software did the opposite. You would take a record, okay, it would be either a CD or an LP, played to the piano will listen to that, and then it will reproduce it physically. Wow. Now, Annabella imported, at great expense, a very rare Yamaha version of that. We brought the engineer that developed the software with the Glenn Gould Goldberg variations, and the piano played the recording of the Goldberg variations by Gould, but not the sound, played the actual notes. And we combined that with the very nicely timed video of Glenn Gould actually playing. So in other words, you had the piano physically playing, and you could see Glenn Gould very nicely timed together. And then that was a cherry on the cake. Annabella brought from Canada the tuner that Glenn Gould used most of his life who is a very old and almost blind man, with his son, and he actually tuned the Yamaha. So it was the nearest, it was a little bit macabre, it was the nearest you could get to listening to Glenn Gould live, dead, playing the piano. So this was, I'm sorry, I'm adding on to something.
No, but I think it's a very important point, because if you then go back through history with all of this as well, the experiment with sound recording, I'm sure Peter's done the same, when he's working with when editing his own material here as well. But if you go back to the very earliest kind of sound and vision together of opera, there's a famous ensemble from Trovatore where they filmed it and they actually recorded it on shellac. And in their desperate attempts to make it sound together the whole time was impossible at the time. Yeah? But we can now do that digitally, and we end up with a rather interesting phenomenon from, I think it's 1912 or 1913. I'm sure somebody could tell, I could look it up when I go home with this. Yeah? And Gould, again, is a very interesting example. Somebody who's in search of something. I don't think he ever found it, but in search of something. Yeah? And even then, if you listen to the famous things like Meistersinger Overture with him, he's actually double recording it. He's actually playing it all four hands himself, yeah, with this, in an attempt to actually push the boundaries again, yeah, with this. And again, what we might do now, what I might do in writing a book, or what Peter does in recording, will be completely different again. As I was saying to Peter, the problem is for me now writing, there's a whole new digital age. And this affects what I do, because everybody wants everything online. But as somebody who was born in 1954, I said, well, just hang on a second. What if you turn off the website? Yeah? What if you turn off the website? What happens to all that work? Yeah? It goes. So I quite like them in a hard copy. But of course, in the future, that too will probably change, and that may never be actually turn-offable. It may be stored forever. You know, with this, technology advances the whole time. And pianos were the same. If you look at the history of the keyboard, starting even before Cristofori and Silbermann, and working your way forward, each time it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, effectively, with this. Yeah. And there's a famous apocryphal comment, which I'm not sure you can ever believe, you know, because of the old whispers thing, that I can't remember who said that. Czerny said that, that's right, Leschetizky said that Czerny said that Beethoven said, yeah? Well, okay, maybe, yeah? That, you know, in the future my cadenzas will not be appropriate for the size of the pianos being used. Well, actually, I pretty much would believe that, actually, because even Beethoven himself, when they shipped that broadwood from London via Trieste all the way up to Vienna, it was probably knackered by the time it got there to him, yeah? He was actually witnessing this metamorphosis of the piano himself. Within their lifetimes, these instruments just grew and grew and grew, you know? So it's a fascinating history, more than any other instrument. Yeah, more than any other instrument that is the case. Probably the last great instrumental change to an instrumental group is probably in the 1930s, and it's probably the string instruments when they actually went from gut strings to metal on gut strings. Yeah? That's probably the last really big change to instruments. There have been modifications since, obviously, to woodwind instruments, etc. Yeah? But the piano is something, if we just even start with Cristofori in 1707, 1721, all that sort of stuff, and work forward, it's the crescendo mark of instrumental making, yeah, with this. It is quite something. And it's worth a read, yeah? And I just wish pianists, young pianists, I know older ones do, but the younger pianists, sit there and just take it off the shelves and have a look at what they do. No, you're a sprightly young soul, yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to make a statement.
No, go ahead.
Question.
Yeah, no, make a statement as well, it's fine.
The things that have changed the most over this long period are the listeners.
Sure, yeah.
And their responses to what we play, and how we play it, the speed we play it, the amount, the dynamic range, and all the rest of it. It's different for people now to the way it was. Let's say 50 years ago.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. But also, if you look at the iconography that I was showing an acoustic recording. Obviously, it's obviously a cross-strung piano. It's a drawing, but it's obviously a cross-strung piano. Yeah? So it's obviously not an Erard or whatever it happens to be. Yeah? But if you then look at other iconography, nobody listened. Nobody listened to what you were doing. Yeah? Yeah? So people would get up, they'd talk, they'd smoke, they'd walk around. You're playing your little heart out, the orchestra's playing their little hearts out, and everybody's having a high old time. Yeah? But they weren't concentrating. Yeah? And this is, if you follow the iconography, the pictures from London concert halls, yeah, and even in the late 19th century, they're still up and chatting away there merrily, all the rest of it. The person who changed that largely was Wagner, because he turned the lights down. Yeah, he actually went off completely by mistake in the ring cycle in 1876 at Bayreuth. He wanted them to be very low, but they just simply went out. Yeah, he wanted them low, but he locked everybody in, and they were there, and they had to face cinematically the stage. Yeah, they had no option. Yeah, with this. It was an extension of Bülow locking him in for the double performance of the Beethoven Ninth Symphony to prove a point, to make them listen. Yeah, and so when you, I remember sitting at a remarkably wonderful performance of a Rameau opera at the Barbican with my absolutely destroyed leg. When I'm doing this, I'm fine. I just forget about them. Yeah, destroyed legs. Sitting there thinking, how long is this piece? It was beautiful. William Christie, beautiful, absolutely well done. But of course, in Rameau's time, nobody would have sat there in more than 10 minutes. They would have gotten up, got a drink, have an ice cream, gambled, seen their girlfriend, come back in, heard their favourite aria, gone out again. Yeah? How we now present in a concert hall has no resemblance to how the music that we play was originally heard. Yeah? And we are desperate to actually have original performance practice. And I often say to my historically informed friends, well, shall I get up and yak to my mate and actually, go out for a drink and come back again? They look horrified. Yeah?
Or even last 4 to 5 hours.
That's right.
Of performances.
Sure,
yeah.
That's right. And they were marathons. When Mozart did the Hafner Symphony, you'd have the first movement, you'd have an organ extemporization, there'd be a piano concerto movement, there'd be an aria, next movement. This would go on for hours. Yeah. Again, and that affects what we do, what the audience does. That's part of the performance practice.
Well, that's all changed.
Yes.
In the 20th century.
Yeah.
It elevated the art of music making to a much higher level because everyone was expected.
That's right.
Even if they failed, everyone was expected.
But it's also greater impact and sense of expectation of somebody like you, though, as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's
what we're fighting against all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's and sometimes the expectation is unrealistic as well. Because you then take the other extreme. They're buying their CDs or they're streaming now the whole time, which lacks merit at times because for instrumentalists and whoever, they're not getting the money they deserve from this as well, particularly in art music. Yeah, well, that's right. That's right. In art music, it's notoriously bad. Yeah, with this, and of course, this is actually they're expecting to hear a robot on stage. And it means that from a young age, you're trying to reproduce this because that's what you grow up with. You are the product, and that's what I was saying about the idea of Reinecker, the idea of Patti, the idea of Wagner. You are the product of your youth.
I was just going to mention this Patti excerpt.
Yeah.
It sounds to my ears dreadful.
Yes, of course.
Absolutely.
Of course. It didn't then, though, you see.
No, precisely, and that's what's really, really difficult to come to terms with.
And
that would be how Maddie obviously was at the night because she was a superstar.
Yeah, absolutely. And but the point about that is, then at exactly the same time, yeah, she would be singing in London. She had built this fantastic castle. It had this castle in Wales that Gwyneth Jones wanted to revamp as an artist's centre. At one point it didn't happen because they couldn't get the state money. Yeah, but which was a great shame. But when she was singing in London, London pitch was A456, so you were a semitone higher or more as a singer. So you're singing the Queen of the Night, it's in the stratospheres up here. The bassers loved it for, Seraglio when you're going into low D, they loved that, yeah? Of course, as she would actually pay to have all the roles transposed down. And if you want to read about stuff like that, read George Bernard Shaw. There's in about 8 volumes. I've got it at home somewhere. You sort of wade your way through this rubbish most of the time. But it's very interesting stuff, yeah? Because it was called French pitch, and that's how they got the money for the proms. Because Robert Newman, who was the manager, who's a singer from the Royal Academy of Music, was a manager. He ran the newly opened Queen's Hall in 1893. He started in 1895 the proms. He said to Henry, would you have £2,000 or £3,000? Well, he could have bought 5 houses for that. Of course he didn't have that money, yeah? But he knew somebody who did, a man called George Cathcart. He was a throat surgeon. And Henry would work with a man called Manuel Garcia Jr., who used to use a laryngoscope, shoving down people's throats to check their throats, yeah? Damaging their throats. And the throat surgeon said, I will give you the money if you drop the pitch. I don't want to see all these singers the whole time. Drop the pitch. And he gave them the money. So they had to go to France and buy French instruments, which were more than a semitone lower, yeah? And eventually they took over, and that's how we began to work. And they changed them to German again after that, yeah? And then you would find in the catalogues, you would actually have advertisements side by side, Boozy and Hawkes were the makers, Philharmonic pitch, A456, and you'd have French pitch. You'd be buying both sets of instruments, yeah? And again, because it was expectations as well, yeah? You were expected to come and do that in London, because somebody like a man called Costa, who's Italian, conducted at the opera, he insisted on that pitch the whole time. Whereas there was like a cold shower being thrown over the artists, you know, with this, yeah?
I don't want to extend your time particularly, but it's a fascinating aspect of what we do to me. Is the context of musical decisions, the context that you're making of it. And I've often thought, because as a professional I started out with the early 20th century,
sure,
i.e. the composers like Stravinsky
yeah,
and that era, that was my comfort zone for a long time. And you keep on hearing quotes from them when they say that they can't stand the way that not the local, but contemporary instrumentalists played. Essentially, that they wanted music making to be much colder. Is the impression they give. Bartok and Prokofiev in particular saying things like that. But in actual fact, I think the context was probably that they were totally indisciplined, the people that they were listening to. And actually, what they wanted was it to be played properly. Not that they wanted it cold at all.
Yeah.
But that context is for me a very fascinating.
Well, yes, but
our outlook as instrumentalists on all music, not just that period.
What you say is absolutely right, because if you go to Richard Strauss, who was the biggest influence on Fritz Busch, biggest influence on John Pritchard on me, yeah? Well, the idea that somebody said, well, Dr. Strauss just stood there. Well, no, he didn't, yeah? I mean, Adrian Bolt makes that absolutely clear, and everybody else who ever saw him work makes this clear, yeah? And the idea of how this sound then projects through generations, again, is important, yeah? I used to do the 29th Symphony of Mozart all the time. Yeah? Now, I never heard John Pritchard conduct it. I was with him for 12 years as his assistant. He's like a father figure to me and all the rest of the stuff. There's no recording of Fritz Busch doing it as well, and there's no recording of Richard Strauss. And every time I would do it, I would be saying to me, rum, it was about 72, 76, yeah, with this one. And I always do it, bim, pam, pa 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 bim, pam, pa pa, with that bowing, yeah, and pam, 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 yaradida dum, pam, 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 there, yeah, with that, yeah. And I was talking to Jonathan Delmo and Charlie McCarry. I said, no, you've got to do it as it comes. I said, yes, but I can't do that somewhere. Anyway, when I started researching Mozart 29th Symphony,
what did he say that you've got to do?
The bowings, you know, you got to do it bum bum, pa 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 as it comes, yeah. But I would always do bim bum, pa 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 bim pa. So you'd actually have a refrain.
You've got to. It sounds like a fundamentalist.
Well, precisely. I mean, even John Elliott Gardner says that, yeah. And then I realised that because I was so grown up on the sound of my old boss John Pritchard and Fritz Busch and Strauss never recorded this. When I did my PhD, I started as the first person to look at conductor's mark scores 40 years ago. Nobody touched them. They were being thrown out, given away. Nobody touched them, yeah? And I'm not exaggerating here at all, yeah? I opened the Mozart score, and I kid you not, I have it on my computer. It's bowed identically. Identically. Now, if you're going to do that bowing, that's the only speed you can really do that piece, because you can't do the bowing at any other speed. It just doesn't work with that as well. And the idea of how traditions begin to work, yeah? Because that's the way I hear Mozart. I can't hear it any other way. And of course, the care with which that is done. We're slightly oblivious now to how traditions work as well. You with this. And if we're then looking back to composers of the era you're talking about, the impact that they would have on their next generation, somehow that's been cut off at the knees as well, because of and it's not always to do with historically informed performance. That's not true either, you know. But because of the broadening of the panorama, somehow it's become more diffuse, I think. And that is sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing, yeah, with this. But my point really is, to sum it up, is that if something's there, look at it and ask the question, just like there, why piano rolls? You know, why? Why is it so? Yeah? Just never accept it at face value. There's always a reason why. Yeah.
How about why is all our music reproduced by streaming and downloading?
Well,
now?
yes.
There's a very good reason for that. It's cheaper.
It is, and I still.
And the people who are making the music get nothing out of it.
Sure,
whatsoever.
And I still make it a point of buying, like my friend here at the front row, buying CDs by the bucket loads. If I want, I have friends who say to me, why don't you just download it? I don't want to download it because I want to buy it, yeah, with this. And I'm happy to give people all my books, you know, that's fine, yeah. But the fact of the matter is, it's people's livelihoods. It's people's livelihoods with this. That's right, it's their profession, yeah.
It's the end of it.
Well, that's right. It will be the end of the profession. It'll become amateurism again. And then you'll go back in time again and have to restart again.
Yeah. So if anybody tells me how much they enjoyed something that I played on Spotify, I want to hit them. I know that sounds a little ungrateful, but...
Bang.
What do you think you're doing? And what is Spotify doing? Just getting in the way, making a lot of money, and making sure that nobody who makes the music themselves receive any of this. So, you know, it's just killing the whole thing. And I know that I'm off topic here, but it's something that...
It's not off topic at all, because actually the piano rolls in particular were the subject of a huge industry as well. Piano was a huge industry, and you know, at that particular point in history, both parties gained from it. There was the sense that the artists would gain, and there was the sense that the companies would gain. Yeah. Now the companies gain, and the artists don't, and that's the problem really, because that kind of the mutual need, the mutual feeding off each other in that sense worked well. Because if you were in America, Schnabel was taken out to America by an American company. He wanted to go with Bechstein. He always wanted to play on a Bechstein, for example. He didn't want to play on American pianos, you know, with this. But they would take them out as marketing devices. Paderewski was the ultimate marketing tool, because he was very happy to do these huge tours. Now, today, Paderewski is largely, well, he's remembered as a name, but not remembered as necessarily as an artist, I would say. Would that be fair to...
I think he's remembered as a very wayward artist.
Yes, yeah.
He was a politician as well.
That's right. Of course, after the First World War, of course, you know, Prime Minister, President, and all that sort of stuff of Poland, yeah. But yes, but it's music is one of these. It's this huge animal you're dealing with the whole time.
What is the role of the competition in the middle of all that?
Well, that's your talk tomorrow, which I'm coming, and you're going to actually ask him really nasty questions.
Well, you know, it's a very big subject.
It is a huge subject, actually. Yeah,
This was a trailer and an advertisement for tomorrow for all of us.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Peter Donoghue here is coming in to talk tomorrow. Do not miss the man. Yes, I'm coming. I'm getting out of bed early, especially to do so.
And it's about competitions in general. Raymond, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you also very much for you being here and enjoying this. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. It's lovely. It's great fun.